Hey there, brothers and sisters. I'm glad you guys are taking this astrology course. For those taking it live, you're the 5th generation. And for those that are watching this at your leisure, well, just welcome. I don't know what generation you are, but it's beautiful to be teaching and sharing with you. So I'm going to begin sharing my screen without further ado. And here you go. So I do believe you guys can see that. So I'm part of an organization called Esoteric Psi, where we kind of spread esoteric and psychological learning for betterment in a practical way. Today, I'm going to be giving the course by myself. Sometimes I have other people helping me, but I've been so blessed to be able to be in charge of kind of the English portion of this. My name is Dr. Alex Aldana. I've been doing Ayurveda for about 5 years now, astrology, well, professionally for about 5 years now, but amateurly for a long time. And well, I'm a medical doctor, and I've been a Freemason for about 12 years now. So I'm glad to share this space with you guys. So without more introduction, let's go ahead and break down what is a natal chart, what are the planets, so what everything that's going on, right? Because in astrology, we do refer to the sun and the moon as planets, and we know they're technically luminaries, and they are because they shine, right? Luminary. But in astrology, we do refer to them all as planets. So I know it's the sun, it's the moon, and then the planets, but just for reference, okay? So the planets are one of the most important elements, basic elements in a natal chart. As the planets move around us, these are the symbols for them. And this is the sun, moon, Uranus, Neptune, Mars, and so on. We'll go into them a bit more. And they're going to be moving around us, right? And as they circle around the sun, as we circle around the sun, they go through this band called the zodiac, right? These are the constellations. Now, there is a difference between the constellation and the sign, right? And there are different types of zodiacs. We're not going to go into that right now unless there's a question on that later. But basically, as we circle around the sun, pertaining to us, because we do have a heliocentric point of view, because the sun, Helios, is the center of the solar system, right? But we are the center of the universe pertaining to ourselves, right? Because everything circles around us, apparently. How everything is with respect to us is going to affect us, right? So the sun, even though we're circling around the sun's going to appear to circle around us, and because we're turning in a certain direction, so everything rises in the east and sets in the west, right? Because we are spinning from west to east, so everything appears to be going the opposite direction. As this is going on, for example, the sun appears to circle around the zodiac, and everything moves around the zodiac, starting from Aries and then Taurus all the way up until Pisces. When something appears to be moving backwards, it will move the opposite direction. And for example, the nodes of the moon are always spinning in the opposite direction. But generally, everything goes from Aries all the way up until Pisces in that direction, right? How did astrology begin, right? So our ancient ancestors have always been curious as to what's going on in the world and what's happening around them. As long as man has looked up at the sky, it's been just incredibly wondered by it. If you've ever been camping, if you've ever just stared up at the stars, it's just something that's amazing. When you when you can't help but just be amazed by the night sky and by these incredible just luminaries that are around us, right? So contemplating this and understanding that when certain planets moved in certain areas and certain signs, constellations, different things would happen. When the moon would be in certain places, different people's energy would be different, more likely to be irritable, to fight, and it would affect some people more than others. So they started observing the events in the sky and correlating them with people's lives, with events, right? So Mesopotamia, in ancient Mesopotamia, um, this got down to a science. Obviously, very smart people, very intelligent people that were observing the skies, got together, spoke, observed, right? And as astrology goes on, we add to this process because it was originally kind of used to predict what was going to happen, right? And then they realized that it didn't only affect the events, but also us internally, right? Well, our internal events. Um, and obviously, these are archetypes, right? Stuff that's happening in us that we don't really understand fully, but we do have a very good idea what's going on. So after the ancient Mesopotamian period, the Chaldeans named the signs as we know them today. The Chaldea is a region in Mesopotamia, and they do have like the Aries, the Taurus, or the sign of the bull. These are basically all generated in this region. My cat is scratching stuff. She shouldn't. Give me a second. Let me throw some. Okay, there she stopped. Every culture has some version of it, right? So there's Mayan astrology. There's all the ancient Indians have some form of astrology because they did observe the night sky, right? So with this, Nagy, stop that. Sorry, that might happen. Sorry about that. So, however, different forms of astrology even have some numerology in it. For example, ancient Mayan astrology, right? So they're not all going to be exactly the same. They all have some form of different systems. And for example, the sun, as is known today, is sometimes observed or it's given the most importance. It's not just about the sun; it's your moon, it's Mars, it's all these events, right? But different planets and different segments of your birth chart, which is your birth chart is the moment you were born, how the planets and how the signs, how everything was arranged, right? So, for example, you might be going through a Mars period, right? And Mars will be more important, or a first, second, third house period, right? So depending what house was activated, what part of the chart is activated, different parts of you will come up. It's a very good opportunity to work on those parts, right? And actually, we won't be able to see that in the course in this course, but for future courses, or if any of you guys have some questions, we can see later on how or why different parts of your charts are activated, so you can see what kind of period you're going through, what you can work on, so you can apply this better, all this knowledge we're learning better to your life, right? Um, so this was really common knowledge, and it was something that's very talked about in India and in many cultures. Astrology is actually still something that's talked about today. It's just common knowledge, right? But with the rise of religion, sometimes knowledge was not exactly the best thing for the mass populace, right? I'm not saying the religions are bad. I'm just saying that they did kind of have this, okay, if the less you know, the less that I have to know, and the easier it is for you to follow and everything that I preach, right? Because sometimes we know that all religions don't, it's difficult for them to explain their version of reality scientifically and with facts and figures, right? So as dogma took over, and dogma is basically um, listen to this, believe this without questioning it, right? As dogma took over with religions, astrology became to be pushed aside, right? And it is, and it's incredibly important, right, to understanding what's going on around you, uh, what's going on inside you more than anything else. And it has many applications. You can even use it to predict what's going to happen, or how the energies is set up in a certain moment, right? Speaking about history, we talked about the Omen period is basically this period in Mesopotamia when it was just in diapers, when it was being born, when people were making observations. And as these observations, these correlations built up, there was this new kind of scientific method developed around it, right? Um, and then after that, in the Hellenistic period, uh, this got kind of spread out all over the world. Why? Because Alexander the Great kind of united the major astrological traditions, the most advanced astrological traditions, um, at least in the region, right? Because we don't know too much about Mayan, because we don't have records of them. Most of the records were destroyed. But of the cultures, civilizations we have records of, it united, Mesopotamia, it united Egypt, and it united India. And what was incredible about Alexander the Great is he actually traveled with a library. He traveled with astrologers. He traveled with these wise people that were kind of able to. Give me a second. Nagy. He traveled with these wise people that um, were able to counsel him, right? And there's actually a very interesting anecdote about him. This is it, right? That when he went into um, in the eastern parts of northern India, right, and he got a lot of different astrologers, right, and he brought all these ancient astrologers, these wise men back to Babylonia, and they told him that it wasn't a good time to enter the city, but to wait a few days until things died down, right? But he then consulted his Greek consuls, and they did some rituals where they opened up bird organs and read the entrails, and they said, "No, yeah, it's fine. You can go ahead and go in." And he never came out again, alive again, right? So he was, for such a wise man, I think he should have listened to astrologers, right? Hitler had many astrologers. So like most governments, even today, have many astrologers counseling them. I think Hitler, the fall of Hitler, actually, I don't know if it's karmic or not, but actually started when he killed off his astrologers because one of them interpreted something wrong, and he got very fed up and he decided to kill all of them, and all his esoteric council actually, and since he stopped getting their advice, he just started losing. I don't know if it has exactly correlation with that, but it's very interesting what a short frustration tolerance will do. And after that, the medieval period happened, right? So in the Hellenistic period, where all this was flourishing around ancient Greece, right? It was a great period because all these different cultures, all these different astrologers got together in Greece, and all these different traditions were kind of shared. Now, for example, in India, where astrology was incredibly big and with such a large population density, astrology advanced a lot, but it was kind of kept tight and close with um, certain families, right? Certain groups of individuals who go to different astrological schools and develop and studies kind of on their own. So it would have a lot of kind of like family formulas for astrology. And look, okay, so if whatever sign Mercury is in is the type of eyes you're going to have, right? Uh, I have Mercury in Taurus, and I do have kind of a droopy, big cow eyes, right? So they developed all these formulas based on their observations and based on things that kept happening. But it was really difficult to kind of when we talk about Indian or Vedic astrology, um, it's hard to talk about as a whole because it developed, um, even though it was very big and there was a lot of sharing information, most of families kept a lot of their information to themselves, right? So if you go to one Indian astrologer that follows the tradition of their lineage very tightly, they're going to have a lot of information that could be very good, but it might not correlate specifically with someone else's information. Like they might not share that, right? So there have been people that have gone around and studying different schools to different astrologers, and uh, and this happens even today as different astrologers develop and study um, the world through their perspective, through their eyes. They will make observations and they will see things and they will have a certain formula for things, and so it keeps going and it keeps advancing even today. But after the Hellenistic period, took a big dive in the medieval period, right? Where in Europe, um, the Dark Ages just took over, and it took a very deep dive. But what kept it alive and what kept it going and flourishing was the Arabic area, right? So in the Middle East, this was where it flourished and where some of the greatest astrologers were able to translate different astrological texts, keep the tradition alive and flourishing, right? Then in the Renaissance, it started taking up again. It started getting some more popularity, and it went back down in what we call the waning period, right? after that, it almost died, literally, like from 1750 to 1900. Astrology, like everyone lost interest into astrology with the rise of science, and then the religion both didn't view astrology very highly. But then the Theosophical Society came in with, Ellen Leo, and before that, Madame Blavatsky. So all these great esoteric teachers came in and started rescuing a lot of the astrological knowledge, because they did see how it applied, and how um, actually how real it was, how you could really see these energy and through the planets, these energies moving around in and outside of you. Um, so after that, humanism took in, and what happens with modern astrology um, is that basically with Carl Gustav Jung, who's a great astrologer, he really applied astrology to the psychology of what's happening inside you, the archetypes. These planets are people, and are energies that are moving inside you. They're concepts there, apart from actual things. For example, it, Mars, which is fire, which is war, which is action, um, was taken more literally, and it is, and can be taken very literally, right? Um, Maybe you have Mars in your fourth, which represents your home. Maybe you have red, your house is painted red, right? Or there's a fireplace that's very active in your household, whatever, or maybe your house burned down at some point. But this took it from much less of a literal standpoint to a more like internal, what's happening inside you, what moves around you, right? And this happened in the Theosophical Revival and humanism. Um, After that, obviously, we have some incredible events, and much more. The scientific period made this so much easier to track, right? So with the rise of computers, of software, of different theories of more communication, the scientific period came in. And right now, basically, we have an excess of information of astrology, right? So it's very difficult to see what worked, what doesn't. And there's so many different types of astrology that are evident and present. It's hard to like know where to begin, right? So this is what we're going to try and do today. I can't give you a course on every sort of astrology, because I'm not an expert in every sort of astrology, but I do have a lot of experience with astrology and different astrological traditions. So all these different types of astrology that are in front of you, Babylonian, Mayan, horary, even electional, right? That that had served different purposes and that have different importances. We're going to just generally see how astrology as a whole works today, and dive a bit into Vedic, dive a bit into Hellenistic, um, and a bit in modern astrology. And so the purpose of this course is to understand our natal charts, which is how the planets were in a place of our birth. And you can even see the chart for a day, and see how the energy is moving around in that specific day. But specifically, this course is directed towards your natal chart. What's going on with your life, right? So this is going to help you better understand the universe, and also what's happening inside you, right? And why. Um, to project these principles towards spiritual development. All astrological traditions, and I don't want to say all, there might be one that I don't know of that doesn't, but they all really have this spiritual aspect to it. The soul, this incarnated in this body, and its journey and what you need to learn, right? So concepts like karma, like dharma, which we're not going to get too much into today, are important, because I personally believe that, a third of your life you do control, you're consciously aware of, and you can manipulate by the way you think, by what you believe, by what you do, by what you consciously want to create. But another third of your life, I think it's karma, is something you can control. You can maybe uh, do actions so the karma isn't that bad, or doesn't control you that much of your life, right? And I think another third of your life is your environments, your surroundings. So there's this, I forget what astrologer has this comparison, but they say that a king and a pauper were born in the same day in this town, or a prince and a pauper. And the same day that the pauper broke his leg, a king sprained his ankle. and the same day that the prince got knighted, or the prince became a king, got crowned, I guess, the pauper opened up his own shop. So for a pauper having his own shop, that rise in status, that rise in power and authority is equivalent to a prince becoming a king. So events, even in twins charts, will be similar. Maybe not exactly the same, because there is a consciousness aspect to it. But the energies and the events will be marked in a similar fashion. I don't know what I did. Give me 1 second, because I think, there we go. Beautiful. Okay, so why does this work? Well, if you just clean your room, you will be able to think differently. Different things will happen, right? And there are very people, many creatives, that can't actually work until the area is clean. Imagine that, but in the macro. Well, how insanely billions of times bigger the universe is, right? So if you just move things around in your room, the energy shifts and you're able to think differently, right? Imagine how that is with planets. If Mars moves with a certain angle pertaining to us, the planet of war, of action, of sex is obviously going to affect us in a different manner. If Mars is this aggressive energy, this testosterone energy, or super renal or adrenal gland energy, is not taken out with sex or with sports or with doing something, it could be channeled aggressively in a negative way, right? And I've seen this, for example, with the moon in Aries, how often people get angry at each other, and how the number of fights maybe increase, right? So when something is happening astrologically, it's always going to affect us. You know, Hermetic esoteric teaching say as above, so below. And these planets, if they do represent something inside us, and as they move around, they're obviously going to affect us, right? It's like this big cosmic family. And for example, the sun might represent your father or the father figure. Your role as a father, if you're a man, right? And even the moon, how it rules water, how it rules the tides, is obviously going to affect us, because we are, well, anywhere from 80 to 20% water, depending on what part of life you're at. So if you're kind of young, and let's say you're an adult and you're maybe 60-70% water, of course this huge massive thing, gravitational object that's moving water around in the earth, is going to affect you, and things that are going to affect that are going to affect you. So it depends on what theory, if it's energy, if it's quantum physics, because at some point, we were all connected from the Big Bang. It doesn't really matter what explanation you try and give it, it works, right? And it doesn't even matter how you try and disqualify it, it works. It just does, um, and as you observe it, sometimes you will have a lot of questions. There are some things you won't understand, and that's fine. There are an incredible amount of different analogies and comparisons, which I've added to this course, right? For example, tarot or Kabbalah or Kabbalistic astrology, they all kind of tie in planets, because they observe the planets actually have an effect on us, right? To their cosmovision, right? To their paradigms, to the way they see things. So some of these things line up 100%, some of them don't. And as we discover planets, for example, like Neptune, like Pluto, like Uranus, sometimes it won't correlate anymore, right? So for example, this is the Kabbalistic tree of life, and Saturn, and most astrologers or Kabbalistic astrologies agree that this Sephiroth, which is the sphere, is Saturn, this one is Mars, this one is Mercury, this one is Jupiter, Sun, Venus, Moon, Earth, right? But these three planets, so there is some discrepancy between it, right? Some say this isn't really Neptune, this is the great central sun, right? The center of our galaxy. So as different planets were discovered, they kind of added it to the cosmovision. Does it apply? Does it not? Sometimes, we're just trying to make sense of things. So really do question everything. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, if something doesn't happen, doesn't work out exactly for you, why? It doesn't mean that it's fake. Maybe it's that, or that it's made up. It just means that maybe we don't understand how it applies. And obviously, this system has existed for 4 or 5 thousand years. So it there are shifts that have happened. For example, Aries, the constellation of Aries, about 2,000 years ago. I don't remember exactly the date, but was where the sign of Pisces is now, right? So this the energy of Aries, which is the spring, that thrusting, that initial energy, is not exactly where the constellation of Aries is now. So there is a shift between the signs and the constellations. We still use the signs, or I still use the signs. Some ancient Vedic astrology still use the constellations. So it's not exactly that group of stars has this energy. It's more so, in my opinion, that that energy, that Aries spring, fiery, starting energy, is representative of that region of the sky, that portion of the sky pertaining to us. So it is weird how we have some microsystems, for example, in Chinese acupuncture, which will place the entire body on the palm of your hand or the palm of your foot or on the ear, and how with acupuncture you can actually and with different forms of therapy, you can actually go into the microsystem, affect it, put a red dot on it, or stimulate it with electricity or with a metal, and that will affect that body part, increase the inflammation on it, decrease the inflammation on it, activate it in some way, turn it off in some way. So with this energy of masculine and feminine of on and off, we do a receptive and giving energy. We do have this incredible kind of almost unexplainable situation. There is the explanation of all these kind of veins or arteries of energy throughout the body that correlate, right? And is it because there's some specific code when we incarnate on this planet? Is it because sometimes things just correlate and affect us when something's moved outside of us that we are attached to in some way? It affects us internally. Who knows? If it is there, that specific planet's code or electromagnetic field, and how when it's if it is conscious, that I believe planets do have some consciousness. I am sure of it, actually. But if that planet's consciousness, if their code, if their electromagnetic composition because of the minerals that they have, if it's that, or if it's just a consciousness thing, who knows? But it is, if you do, when you start developing a specific relationship with the moon or with even our own planet, it speaks to you differently. The Native Americans did have a very beautiful relationship with the planet Earth, and it gave them, great crops and great wisdom. So that is the same for the external planets, which represent different things in us. If you develop a special relationship with the sun or Mars or whatever planet is weak in your chart, which we'll see that later, maybe that you will have more context and you won't be driven by that, right? For example, Michael Jordan had a not so great Mars that made him try even more, and that made him become, the greatest basketball player in history. But we'll see. Let's see. So the first step to understanding astrology is understanding the principle of duality, yin and yang. Yang is this active masculine principle of movement, and it's represented by the elements earth and fire and air, right? So the masculine principle is direction, it's progress, it's purpose, right? It's ideas, it's reasoning, it's logic, and it's this extroverted quality. Um, with the feminine, it's a bit different. It's more receptive. It's more about community, about interacting with others. Even if it's not, even if it's very, if it's not a pleasant interaction, that moves you from to interact with others or for others to affect you, because it receives, right? So because this energy receives so much from the world around it instead of giving so much like the masculine, it can cause this introversion, this need to be by yourself. Even though the feminine is associated with relationships, with interacting with other people, what happens sometimes it causes a need for boundaries, for protections, for this being too much for our consciousness, because our brain can't handle it, right? Our emotions can't handle it. Piscean people are famous for being empathetic and feeling everything around them, and that being too much, and that expressing in puffy, like crying eyes. Or if you ever feel like someone that has this really, really, really strong Pisces in their chart, the, like a Pisces ascendant, or maybe moon and ascendant Pisces, you'll see that like their eyes seem like they just finished crying all the time, just kind of puffy eyes all the time. And that is because they feel so much all the time. That's too much, right? So this nurturing, this more materialistic, because earth and water are more tangible things than fire and earth. It's more focused on the body, more focused on matter, right? Um, they are more there are slower planet, there are slower elements, earth and water. So the progress that these people make might be at a slower rate, but it might be more permanent, right? So for example, someone that's very masculine, that has a lot of fire and air in their chart, they might make incredible progress and leaps and then go back, right? And with earth and water, it's a slower progress, but it's more constant, right? They're less likely to go backwards again. um, so yeah, for example, Taurus and Cancer, they progress slowly at their own rate. You can't force them to move. They will move whenever they feel ready to, you know. Um, but for the masculine signs, they're gonna love to move. They're gonna love to progress. They're gonna try and keep up with you, right? Um, Generally speaking. So these four elements, the feminine here, the earth and the water, and the masculine, the fire and the air, uh, we're going to break down how they're different to each other. So earth is static normally, right? So even meetable earth will be stubborn, but practical in many ways. Um, these are called triplicities, and you kind of wonder, why are they called triplicities? There are four elements, right? Triplicity means three. Well, because there are three signs to each element, right? So for example, the earth elements, which are Taurus, Virgo, and Capricorn, they're going to be practical, materialistic, and realistic. They are not people that like to daydream. They are people that, how can I use this to progress? How can I use this to be feel good? How can I use this to whatever, right? So for example, um, Virgo, which is Mercury in Earth, is going to be much more practical than Mercury in Air, which is more kind of philosophical and mental and likes to create things and their own stories and keep themselves busy by thinking, right? Um, with and they can't, because they're so simple, or because they like to keep things so simple, earth signs tend to be organized. Not necessarily, they could have other things going on, but they're the most organized out of the other elements, and responsible. They understand that they have a role, a physical role here on earth. And for example, Taurus might be a slower worker than Virgo or than Capricorn, but they'll be steadfast. They'll keep working at their own rate. There are people that don't mind working longer, but they're working at their own pace. Um, they can be perceived as lazy, or when this excessive earth energy is when they turn themselves off. They don't want to work. You're not going to move the boulder, right? And hypercritical, right? Why? Fire is judgy, but specifically Mars, right? But Earth, because they're so focused on what's happening right now, um, they can focus on the negative and not advance and progress, right? So people that have a lot of Earth in their chart, they're going to have this issue of, these are the way things are, I don't like it, and just this frustration with it. Instead of taking initiative to change it, they can be bound on how things are, and not necessarily on how things can be if they move and they progress and they change things. So with water, for example, water is very sensitive, very emotional, intuitive. So this can be a little bit living can be too much sometimes for people who have a lot of water, because their emotions, especially when the moon is in a water sign, can perceive so much and feel so much that when if you notice when you're feeling down, you're not seeing clearly. You're focusing more on the negative. If you're feeling sad or depressed or even anxious, emotions will cloud your perception of reality. And so with people that have a lot of water, their perception of reality can be up, yeah, obstrued by this emotional state. But they can also be very perceptive and intuitive and pick up on little things. And but the thing is, sometimes they'll ignore that. Most of the time, intuitive people won't be like very in control or active of their intuitive nature. And astrology can be a great tool for helping them get strength with this. So, for example, when we get into water signs, we'll find that they are really like they're really well and have good intentions. They're even sweet people when they're in a good mood, um, or the sweetest people when they're in a good mood, right? And they can be dependent and kind. Um, but when water is not controlled, when it's not in a harmonious state, it can get into a clingy uh, like expression, right? Or even secretive, because what's hidden between the water, below the water, we can't see it, right? So they are, because they're so sensitive and they don't want to share all of themselves. Maybe Pisces, but um, they don't want to share all of themselves because they know that they've been hurt before and that they are vulnerable, and they don't necessarily like that about themselves, right? Especially Cancer and Scorpio, they don't like that vulnerability. So they will be more secretive, more, they won't share exactly everything about what's going on in them, right? Um, any questions so far about the feminine, about the earth and water, about what's happening in your lives now? Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. So as far as fire goes, fire changes. When you cook with fire, and fire transmutes, breaks down molecules, builds new ones. So fire loves to break things down in order to change them around in their own image of what's best. And this passion for change can, when it's channeled in a positive way, make people that are very optimistic, make people that lift you up when you're feeling down. But if it's not channeled, or if it's maybe influenced in a negative way by other planets, or it's not in a sign it feels comfortable with, it can be impulsive or and even aggressive, because fire does give you that passion, that drive for sex, for moving, for doing. Uh, but sex isn't always, pleasant, isn't always consensual, isn't always. So there are a lot of little details, and fire is a beautiful element, but it can burn. So it can even be a spiritual fire, right? So it's said that a lot of the masters of spirituality, they will either go bald or they will have gray hairs. They have a whole bunch of gray and white hairs. Um, why? Because this fire of spirit will burn the hair, right? So we'll make it white or burn it off. So fire has so many different facets of itself. It's different in Leo, it's different in Sagittarius, it's different in Aries. Just like, you know, the Cancer, Pisces, and Scorpio are completely different um, expressions of water. They do have a lot of things in common. So this common thread is what the elements are. And air. So air is very light. It's hard for air to keep a certain emotion for too long, because they'll be distracted. And sometimes when there's too much air in a chart, specifically Aquarius, someone can seem like they're not there because they're in their head, they're in their mind so much. Um, but they are some of the most sociable signs, some of the most motivated to interact with other people. Um, and they have this intense need for freedom. You can't keep air in a container because it'll stop being wind. It'll be static. It's the empty space, except for the tiny little particles in there, right? But the particles are so stretched out. So these people have an intense need for freedom and can panic when they don't feel free. However, for example, Libra, their sense of freedom is just has everything being harmonious, right? They're more attached than the other air signs. And this is because Venus, needs to be with other people when or in a pleasant environment in general. So this element of air represents quick wit. Why? Because air is mind. That is something that's very important. Air is your thoughts, the brain, right? Because of this, if there's something that sticks with you about the air signs, it's mental stimulation. They are always stimulated mentally. They love, right? Thinking and being in their heads. Where maybe earth signs will just think with the necessary amount and not over dwell on it or not be that active mentally. Obviously not just pertaining to one planet. We have to take the entire chart into consideration. But this quick mental energy can transform into anxiety, nervousness, indecisiveness, and this getting hung up on the details of maybe not taking actions. But because they can think in so many different ways, they're normally the most tolerant of the signs, the least judgy, because they can see the other people's perspective, because they are so flexible mentally normally, right? Aquarius isn't that flexible mentally, but they do have a lot of energy, a lot of mental energy going on, and they can be very intelligent normally. Even if they're not book smart, they'll be like life smart, or at least overthink things in life. So this first exercise, I'm gonna go ahead and pause the recording in a bit. We're gonna look at our natal chart that you all should have, and if you don't, just contact me and I'll go ahead and send it to you with your information. I'll need your I don't even need your name, but it's good to have a reference your name, your date of birth, the place you were born, and the time you were born. The time is very important, because even a 5-minute difference can move your ascendant, right? Which has happened a lot. Sometimes some people like, yeah, I'm a Taurus ascendant. Like, I really don't think so. Nothing in this chart correlates with your life. But if you were born 6 minutes before and you're an Aries ascendant, like everything makes sense now. So sometimes even we have to take that into consideration. Check the accumulation of elements in your chart and take your ascendant into consideration. So for example, if your first house or your ascendant is in a fire sign, go ahead and take that into consideration as a fire element as well, and see where your balance is, because we're going to see what an excess of a certain element will cause in you. Okay, so for example, this is the elements in my natal chart. If you realize I have a lot of air, I have a lot of earth, decent amount of water, but there's not so much fire. So a lack of fire can sometimes, for example, a little bit, cause depression. I don't have that much issue because with sadness or with not lack of motivation, because when I do feel sad or not motivated, I have so much air in me that I just think of something else and I get distracted and I'm not sad for too long. So that's that air distractedness working positively. So reflect on how this has marked you for better or for worse. I'm going to go ahead and pause the recording, and so you guys can continue, if you can pause it so you have a chance to reflect on your chart as well. Give me a second. Pause recording. Beautiful. There was a question. If we have, this is a chart. This is Frank Sinatra's chart. I just randomly chose someone that I liked, although he's a very controversial figure because he is a mobster, right? So he's got a lot of good and a lot of bad. Very neutral figure in the world, right? So the AC is your ascendant, right? This is your initial impulse. This is your body, so it's going to affect you a lot. That's why I asked you guys to take that into consideration. There was a question if you take the MC and the IC, or the descendant, into consideration. The MC is your midheaven, and why it's MC is because it's the Latin words, and the IC means the hidden place. In Latin, I forgot the Latin word for it because I never took Latin. But yeah, if you want to have a better analysis, you can take the AC, for example. Frank Sinatra's AC is in Libra, right? So that would be another point for air, or another tally for air. And it could be argued that because the 4 houses that affect you the most are the cardinal houses, so your first, your 7th, your 4th, and your 10th house, that those can be taken into consideration as well. I would experiment with it. I would just take the AC into consideration, and then take the MC and IC into consideration as well, and see if that actually represents you as a person more so than just taking the AC, right? Now, I do use a system called whole houses. So, for example, all of Libra, for me, I would interpret as the first house. This system of the houses is called Placidus, and it's calculated differently. But I'm not going to go into how it's calculated. It's very complex. So Libra, I take Libra to be the entire first house. And with the Placidus system, they take the ascendant point, which is this is exactly the horizon where you were born. So, for example, if you take a lot of Indian systems or a lot of Vedic systems, would have specific meanings for certain stars. Now, I say this ancient Vedic systems, but really a lot of astrologers have studied the Vedic systems, and now it's kind of a universal thing. So, specific star that means something for the Vedic system, if it's on your horizon, if it's on that ascendant, that says a lot about how your life is going to play out. So if you have your exact birth time, it's beautiful because you can see exactly what that degree, or what the star that was in that degree, means about your life. That's more for an advanced course. We're not really going to go into that. But if you're sure about your birth time, that's something very awesome to look into. If not, I would recommend you check out your sun and your moon and what that degree means, because that can say a lot about your life as well. Well, sorry for that tangent. If that confused you, then go ahead and submit your questions to me. So, if we see, Frank Sinatra has a lot of fire, that passion, that drive for change, for stepping up in his life, in his world. And curiously enough, he doesn't have that much earth. So he probably wasn't that driven for money, more so for success, for fame. He probably enjoyed money a lot, because Capricorn loves status more so than anything else, loves reaching his goals, right? And if you realize his second house, let's see, first house, second house. The second house in this case would be Scorpio, and Scorpio is ruled by Mars. Where is he? Where is his Mars?
It's in Leo.
Leo, there you go. It's in Leo, and it's in his 11th house. So this says that a lot of his income is going to come through others. Why? Because let's see, this is 11th house. The 11th house is a house of large groups. The 11th house is a house of interacting with many people, of entrepreneurship, of doing something once and then always getting that retribution paid for it. And when it's in Leo, it's about them looking at you as a shiny thing, right? Because the sun rules Leo. It's the only thing that can be seen when it's out, right? So it's going to call its attention to it. So his form of income was based on him being the center of attention of large groups of people, right? And he was a very manly figure in his day, right? Mars is this intense masculine energy, right? Um, well, we'll go into that a bit later. Because, oh yeah, for example, this would be the traditional ruler for Scorpio. The modern ruler for Scorpio is Pluto. So they will give different interpretations. I like, for my brain, for my understanding, It's worked out better when I use the traditional rulership. Why? Let me give you an example of what someone who uses the modern rulership would maybe interpret this as, right? So if we know that the second house is money, is material possessions, it's what you own, what's on you, or what you value, right? This could tell me that, let's say, that this house is linked to his 10th house. Then his 10th house would be then him being recognized is actually what's getting his form of money. Now, is it really him being recognized? I wouldn't say so much. It doesn't make quite as much sense to me, because his Pluto is in Cancer, and it's more of a motherly energy, more of a homey energy. It could be argued that he's a household name, right? But that doesn't really ring so much as a bell to me, as because he was known as the voice, right? The only voice, the sun, right? Which is more of a Leo energy. So this is why I think it's more through networking, more so through this 11th house energy, more so than the 10th house energy, that he actually makes his income. And it's just worked way better for me to use traditional rulerships. I would recommend you try them both out and see how you understand the energy to be best, right? Because, for example, speaking about rulership, so when a sign has it's called ruled by a planet, it means that that planet's energy and that sign's energy are very, very, very similar. So it's like being in your house. It's actually called the planets that planet's where it rules, where its house, right? So, for example, Mars and Aries, they're very, very similar energies, right? Before we discovered, because you can't see Neptune, you can see Uranus, and you can't see Pluto in the night sky. So before we discovered them with telescopes and with observation and with mathematical calculations, we only really focused on the two luminaries, the sun and the moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Saturn, and Jupiter and Saturn, right? So those were the planets, and through the calculation of the north and south node, were used a lot in, for example, Vedic astrology. Those planets, so the ancient astrologers said, okay, so the Mars energy is very similar to the Aries, and when Mars is in Aries, certain things happen, so it rules Aries, right? So they assigned all these rulerships, which we're going to look into. But then when the new planets were discovered, the modern astrologers wanted to fit them into a certain planet, and they realized that a lot of the themes that come up in Scorpio actually came up in Pluto as well. Death, sex, change, transmuting something into something completely different, right? So we're like, oh, Pluto is a ruler for Scorpio, but they're not planets that can be seen, so they're not so easily connected to tangible. I think they're more generational planets and more spiritual planets. So in that aspect, it can be that maybe he was a household name for his generation, and that helped him be successful, right? So try using both, see what's easier for you in general, or what makes more sense to you, and try and also figure it out the other way. So how could this modern rulership be in place, right? In this way, astrology is a very mental exercise, and it can also be a very intuitive exercise. We'll go into how it can be intuitive later, but in general, I know this was a lot of information, and again, questions, and a lot of this will be answered as we go on. Okay. So excess of fire, we all know someone that has too much fire in their life, right? They will run you over. They won't let you speak. If you're speaking, they won't care. They'll just speak over you, right? They can be perceived as arrogant, extravagant, or selfish. And now, in a positive term, it can be excessively optimistic. I don't think being excessively optimistic is a good thing, because you're not in touch with reality. If you don't know where you're at, you can't affect the world the way you want to affect it. It's important to know where you come from, where you're at, and where you're going. If you don't know these three things, you can't really go in that direction. And if you're excessively optimistic, you're not really seeing where you're at right now. So, or they can be excessively dominant, right? because they want to change the world in their image, right? It's like a tantrum, a tempered tantrum. It's a very fiery thing, right? A lack of fire, though, that fiery passion, when it's missing, that can make for people that are apathetic. It can make for people that are easily depressed, pessimistic, or even a lack of commitment. Why? Because fire, has this, when it's committed to something, unless it runs out of steam, it's going to change it because it loves to change things, right? Give me a second. Let me mute myself while the truck passes by, because I think you guys can hear the whistling of the recording. But this focus on the way they want the world to be and how they're committed on changing it, if they do have a very superficial way of looking at things, they can be very materialistic people, or focus on looking or being cool or having a cool car, or looking good, right? And it can even be that can be so much of a focus, and they can be like deadly serious and not have fun because they're so focused on changing the world to be the way they want it to be, right? They're not necessarily always serious people, but they can be that focus is too much, right? I would say Earth is maybe a little bit more serious than fire. But when it's in balance, when the passion, when that that fire is balanced, it can be for very vigorous people, for very active, passionate people, spontaneous, loyal, positive, and confident people. Well, here's the thing about the active element of fire. Fire tends to burn itself out. If you have a fire, you need a lot of wood to keep it alive. So this excess of this energy of change, of movement, of passion can the fire can die out if it's not kept with enough fuel. What's fuel for fire people? Sleep, food. Because this fire energy is so intense, it can wear you out. So it's very important, if you have a lot of fire in your chart, for you to be compassionate. I know compassion is not a very fiery thing, but be compassionate for yourself and give yourself the chance to rest. For example, another element that can wear itself out, but because of overthinking, is air, right? But it's a different energy. For example, air people, because they have a lot of mental energy, whether it be analytical or creative. It depends on how it's expressed, right? But an excess of air, well, I'll explain the excess, lack, and balance, and then I'll explain the mechanism behind it, or how they can wear themselves out, right? So an excess of air can make for people that are disinterested and fanciful. Why? Because they're so in their head, they don't really care what's going on in the outside world. Undecided, chimerical. Why chimerical? Because they can seem not to have backbone. Be a certain way with a group of people, with a certain person be another way. But that's really because they can see all perspective and all sides. So they don't really have a very stable viewpoint on something, because sometimes they can be convinced to do otherwise. But we need these kind of people in our lives. Like, I know we can't be too airy, because we won't have a backbone, and our morals won't be fixed. There's this phrase called strong morals loosely held, right? So if we have strong morals, if we know what our morals are, but we can go in depth, have this analysis, and see, okay, well, maybe this moral isn't that good. This is how society evolves. So before, gay people, bad, they're horrible, gay people shouldn't exist. And now society is changing to accept them, to understand that, to question their stances on gay people and transgenders. And this is beautiful change, right? So strong morals, loosely held. You have to have strong morals because it's your compass in life. But you have to be able to question them. Is this really the best, right? So air is definitely this moralistic change in society, which is needed. And I love the fact we're entering the age of Aquarius, because this questions all of society's morals. And we do need to question our morals from time to time. Well, we can't question everything all the time, because we wouldn't do anything, right? But this kind of replanting, revisioning who you are is really an airy kind of thing. And people, yeah, it can lead to people that live in their head, right? A lack of air. What does a lack of air do? A lack of air can cause introverts because air wants to socialize, wants to interact, wants to see what other people are thinking, or just wants to talk. And they can be subjectively simple, right? If you don't have a lack of air, it's, this is the way things are. That's it. Air loves to see, well, yeah, but this and this detail and all these different variables, right? That's what air does. That's its essence. And it can be isolated or disconnected people, right? So when it's a lack of air, there's like this, I don't care about you, I don't need other people's perspective. I don't need to see other things. This is the way things are, and blah. When it's balanced, balanced air is just so beautiful. I mean, I might say that because I have a Sun Jupiter conjunction in Gemini, which is an air sign. But when someone can be intellectual but not overly think things, not think things too much, when you're able to summarize a topic well, because the next air will have you jabber on in a tangent and just talk about things forever. But when it's balanced, you can say just enough to give context and to explain something well without explaining too much or without saying too much. I can have idealistic people, but that do have a backbone. Like, yeah, I understand your point of view, but these are my values for these reasons. But we can dialogue about it, and I can go inside and maybe change myself, right? People that are very observant and can pick up on very tiny things because they observe the well so much and they love to interpret. So his body posture changed. What does that mean? Oh, he looked this way. What does that mean? So that there are people that can pick up on very subtle things and be the right amount of communicativeness, or have the right amount of communicativeness, I guess. Not talk too much and not talk too little. Now, why does air wear itself out? Because it takes more calories to think than to move your body. If you work out and you're reading and thinking all day, there's more calories wasted on thinking because they're literally electrical impulses. You're producing electricity when you are thinking. And the other thing is, like, thoughts normally become with emotions. So if you're not careful and your thoughts aren't well organized and well structured, you'll have an excess of fear, which is very airy, or of tension, or excess of nervousness. And these kinds of energies will wear you out. Or even if you think a lot and worked up and get angry, that anger will wear you out. The adrenaline will wear you out. So it doesn't matter like where the air takes you. Air tends to think a lot, and this normally causes nervousness, and that normally wears you down. So I hope I was clear about how fire and earth and next to that can be can wear you down very much, right? Earth. I love Earth because I like to observe Earth people. You can always tell when someone's moon is in an Earth sign. Well, there might be other elements involved, right? But they're people that aren't like, they move kind of like squarey and boxy. They're not very flowy in their movements. Air people are more subtle in their movements. My wife has an excess of earth, and when she's cleaning a glass, sometimes she'll apply too much force to it and break it. And she doesn't have like this. She's in good shape, but when she moves kind of like rough, right? When she was giving her baby food, like, she would not do it in a very caring manner because she loved him, but her movements were kind of like rough and not as flowy, right? And even like, oh, and when she would like put some food in my mouth, like I would just receive like too much, People that have a lot of earth, just generally when they're moving, they can dance pretty well, um, depending on how they express that in themselves, right? But their movements are, I don't know how to explain it, just very earthy, kind of rough, right? When you have an excess of earth, It can be tedious, distrustful, undecided, materialistic, and calculative people because they're just so focused on the outcome, on what's happening. They're just so interested in themselves and how they can benefit or how they can feel pleasure that they don't care about other people, right? Earth can be very cold. A lack of Earth is impractical, it's unstable, unmotivated, disorganized, unproductive, and compulsive. Why? Because we do have to care somewhat of what's going on around us. If Gandhi didn't really care if the UK or was in charge of India or not, he wouldn't have done the movement to liberate it, right? So our what's happening on outside of us needs to reflect or should reflect what's going on inside of us. But when we have a lack of Earth, we don't really care. So it can lead to a very unstable life. Earth people don't like to take risks. That's one thing that they hate. Oh my God, they can't feel like they can't stand feeling uncertainty. Like the earth moving below them, it's not something they can't take. So taking that jump, taking the leap, taking the risk is something that's almost like too much for them. And that's something that they do need to work on because sometimes in life you need to take a risk in order for positive change to take place. And sometimes it doesn't work out. And that's just a gamble that some people will take or you need to take sometimes. So, balanced Earth. Oh, I love. If there's one thing about Earth you take away, practical. I've loved Earth, and I am very practical. If I can't apply a piece of knowledge to my life, it's just tedious and whatever to me, right? Um, I have this Gemini energy of being an information junkie. I love learning, but if it's not learning in a way I can use, I can't. Um, Earth will always be a little bit more conservative because it likes to maintain things the way they are. Change again is not. They're not a fan of change. Um, Methodical, productive people, persistent, patient, stable. Um, for example, Capricorn. Even when they're trying to get back at you or hurt you in a way, they'll be patient. They'll wait until they're able to mess with you in the way they want to. Um, and they're ordered and hard workers. That's something that's beautiful about Earth people. Like they don't care how much effort they need to put into it. If they want it, they'll put the effort into it and work hard for it. Oh, water. Something happens when your moon is in a water sign because moon rules water and controls water. A lot of the characteristics of that sign are just so amplified when the moon is in a water sign. Excess of water can make people are fearful, influential, unstable, shy, distrustful, and susceptible. Why? Because the moon and water, they absorb things, and they know that they are affected by things around them. And in the past, that has worked out horribly for them, right? It's been too much. So maybe, for example, Taurus and most of the water signs are very perceptive. They feel and they are very intuitive about certain things. But that openness that makes them know or perceive what's going to happen or what's going on, if there's negative energy around them, they will feel that and it affects them too much. So definitely with water, there needs to be this a way of controlling that, of putting a barrier, putting up a wall. Okay. Um, a lack of water can be people that are repressed, insecure. Why repressed? Because water is flowy. So water flows, and um, with people that are repressed, they don't flow, right? They can't see that in themselves, and water um, can feel and sense everything that's happening on inside them. They might not like it. For example, Scorpio really hates that about themselves, right? Impersonal people, insensitive, closed off, or have a lack of close relationships. Why? Because water, when it makes a deep connection, water can have a lot of friends or few friends because lunar personalities have few friends, but they're so close. They're so deep the relationships are so deep. When they do develop a relationship with someone, they can connect with that person so deeply, and just even die for them. Well, Scorpio doesn't really die for anyone, but they'll go to battle for people. Um, Balance, right? Yeah. Well, I guess they can die in battle, and I think some part of them does understand that battle can end in death. Balance. Water would be people are sensitive, intuitive, reserved, receptive, protectors, and very deep people. Water can be shallow or it can be deep, right? But it's always emotional. So the water signs can represent either the beach, which gets progressively deeper, a lake, a river, ocean. For example, Pisces is a deep ocean. And when you really dive into the waters of your mind, the waters of your emotions, there's an endless universe of what can happen there. So we can get lost in the ocean. We can get lost in water very easily. So we do need some other elements to help guide us and to give us some bearing, some direction. Very well. Okay. Any questions, any comments about water that I missed? No? Beautiful. Or any of the signs? Okay. So these are the planets. Obviously, the Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. We're not going to go into some of the asteroids or, for example, the North Nodes right now, but we will go into them. Generally speaking, Sun is your sense of identity. It's the energy that colors your life, the vitality, how that vitality is going to be expressed. Your moon will be more your emotions, how you remember things, because it's also like your automatic mind, Mercury is your analytical and is your analytical mind and how you communicate, how you learn. How sometimes, how you learn things it could be Moon and Mercury. Moon and Mercury will have they're very closely related in many ways that we're going to see. Venus is what you find beautiful, what you enjoy, what kind of people you enter relationships with, or what you bring out in them, what you enjoy about other people. As far as the social planets or the external planets, Mars is kind of in the border because it has some intrapersonal and external or interpersonal. Mars is how you do things, how you output your energy. Jupiter speaks more about morality, about expansion, how you expand, how you grow, how you, even connect with other people or with groups of people, because it has a lot to do with the other as well. And Saturn is more about structure, about obstacles, about reality. There's this whole thing about malefic and benefic planets. It's very subjective. For example, Mars will make things harder. Saturn would make things take more time or delay the consequences, delay you being able to harvest, right? So Saturn delays but never denies. And that's obviously subjectively bad, right? Because Saturn is the planet that brings the consequences of everything you've done. So if those consequences are bad, you kind of want there to be a delay in things. And if the consequences are good, well, you don't want the delay to be there, right? So it's a very subjective experience, how you experience a malefic or benefic planet, because once you do make peace with that energy and understand that Mars is not bad, it might delay things, but it might delay things for a reason. And Mars might make things more difficult, but it might make things more difficult for a reason, because sometimes you need to develop that courage, that strength, that drive to do things, right? So that Mars energy, that difficulty with Mars and Saturn, definitely make you the person you are. There's a saying that the tree that is the strongest is not the one that's in the strongest earth, or the best earth, but it's the one that has the deepest roots. So the earth can be loose, but it will make deeper roots to make a stronger connection with it, right? So definitely the malefic planets, Mars, Saturn, and even the nodes of the moon, they will be difficult parts of our life, but they will make us grow those roots make us be stronger. So we can't just live our life getting everything we want, because that's not how this reality works. It's not how Earth works, right? So understanding that we do need the bad with the good, and that the bad is something that's always going to be there, um, we will be more harmonious and it won't affect us as much, right? There's always a problem to solve. We will never not have problems to solve. That's just the way this incarnation is. So the quicker we make peace with the malefic planets, the better our life will be generally. I don't know if that made any sense to you guys, but I hope it did. So spiritual distance, or the distant planets, or the generation planets, right? Because we will share, not necessarily all of them, but most of these planets, the placement of them with people in our generation. So Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, they're very slow moving planets, where, Sun, Moon, Mercury, very quick moving planets. So where Uranus, where Neptune, where Pluto are, will mark certain trends in our generation. It's very obvious. We can see that definitely the difference from our parents to our generation, right? Where Pluto is, my generation had a lot of taboos to make not taboos, right? The Pluto and Scorpio generation had a lot of taboo breaking, a lot of replanting what's correct, what's not correct, what's right, and a lot of that introspection, figuring how things work, right? A lot of my generation is reaching its peak, where the greatest scientists, and the most movement and the most introspection is actually happening, right? Because, say what you want about Scorpio, they are detectives. They figure things out. That's really something that my generation has worked on. Very good. Okay, so let's understand the doshas. Understanding the doshas aren't necessary for understanding astrology in general, but they are important for understanding how certain elements are expressed, and it's very important for Vedic astrology, right? So it's recording. Yeah, it's recording. Okay. So there are three doshas: Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. Vata is a combination of air and ether. Ether is just empty space. So for practical reasons, we're just say Vata is air. It's expression of air in your body and your mind, your temperament, right? The difference between temperament and your personality: temperament is how you're built. Personality is how you adapt to the situation. It's the mask you put on, what you learn. So we can have a temperament that's very fiery, very Pitta, very anger and passion driven. But throughout life, you've just been beat down every time you fought. And so you learned to really pick your fights and to calm that initial impulse to fight down, or to say something, or to do something. So your elements will always be Pitta, your essence will always be fiery, but you have dealt with it. You've learned to deal with it. You put this mask on, right? To not let it take over you quite as much. I don't know. Did that make sense? Yeah. Okay. Very good. So, Pitta, for practical purposes, will be fire. It's a combination of fire and water. But when you put fire to water, it boils. So there's this heat aspect to it, right? Kapha will, for practical purposes, be earth, right? It's water and earth, and it's this bulky mass kind of situation. So this would be three different body types when it's balanced, right? When it's not balanced, it's someone that's excessively thin, right? Vata will always, or the airy complexion will always be thinner. But when that nervous, anxious, airy energy, it's too much, it's someone that's way underweight. That's unhealthily thin, right? But what's healthy for Vata will not be healthy for Kapha, right? What people say is a normal, which you should weigh, is, Vata people will always be a little underweight. Kapha people will always be a little bit overweight. But there's a difference between being 10 pounds overweight, which is healthy for Kapha, and being 40 pounds overweight, right? So even when Kapha is very, very healthy, it's always going to be, which is the earth kind of energy. Even when it's incredibly healthy, it still will be a little bit overweight. And just because they're heavier, their bones are heavier, their muscles are denser, they tend to accumulate more fat, right? So Pitta what's normal is kind of this middle Pitta weight. And these are kind of strong, kind of muscular people, but they're strong, lean people, I would say, right? Because Kapha will either build muscle or fat, and they just bulky in general. And so when someone that's very Kapha, my body's very Kapha, I tend to gain weight quite easily. Although I'm very mercurial, so when someone is very mercurial, the proportions, because we all have this different proportion in our body, right? We're all Kapha Pitta Vata or Vata Pitta Kapha in a certain proportion of this, right? So my body is definitely mainly Kapha. I tend to gain weight quite easily. And so I can use that to my advantage by gaining muscle, because muscle burns more energy. It's easier to maintain a very healthy weight and a good looking figure if I focus that, okay, it's easy for me to gain mass. Let's gain muscle instead of fat. And that's a beautiful Kapha technique. So Vata, right? What are the characteristics of Vata? Vata is dry, so kind of have dry skin. They'll be light, their body will be very light. Cold, right? They're both cold, but Kapha will be cold and wet, and Vata will be cold and dry, right? Rough skin, because it's dry, it can be rough. Subtle, these are called the gunas, right? And these are the attributes that come with each element. And they're mobile, move. Just like the air has mental movement, Vata people will be moving all the time, both mentally and jittery physically. They'll need to be doing something. That's why like a lot of Vata addictions are like smoking, because they need to be doing something with their hands. Yeah, just addictions that involve doing something with your hands um, are very Vata things, out of nervousness, right? Because each dosha will feel more of certain emotions. Vata will feel more fear and nervousness. So if you're eating, for example, Vata, eating or overeating can be a very Kapha thing, but Vata will overeat as well, just because it needs to do something with its hands and its mouth. So if you're overeating, you really do have to analyze why you're overeating. If you're overeating for comfort, it's Kapha. If you're overeating because you need to do something and because there's anxious energy, it's Vata. So yeah, Vata people, when they overeat, they can become kind of bulky, but kind of a fake bulkiness, because their essence is very Kapha, is very Vata. They'll be very wind, right? Um, and Vata is very clear energy, right? So Pitta, this fire energy, it's oily, sharp. People that have a lot of Pitta, their body odor will be very pungent, very intense, because it's more oily. And this oiliness will allow more bacteria to grow, which is actually what causes the smell, right? Um, so a lot of sometimes they'll notice it, sometimes they won't. But generally, a lot of the Pitta smell is a little bit more intense than the Vata or Kapha smell. Obviously, depends how much person showers and hygiene and other factors, right? But just left alone. Hot, light, obviously, because fire shines, right? And even if you have like greasy skin shines, right? Mobile and liquid. What? So acne, for example, is a very Pitta thing, because Pitta is fire, it's inflammation. And it's also due to oiliness in your skin, right? The pore gets clogged up. So for acne is a very Pitta kind of illness, and when there's an excess or there's an imbalance of it. So different doshas, according to their tendencies, will develop different illnesses, right? Because of an excess or lack of. And it's like, oh yeah, I was Pitta when I was younger, and now I'm not. No, you're always Pitta, right? You're always what you were when you were younger. The proportions really didn't really change. For example, I thought I was Vata for the longest time, but it was just because I was in an environment in my teenage years that was very stressful. So I couldn't gain weight. I couldn't gain muscle mass. I was very thin, but it wasn't because my essence was Vata. It was just the circumstances around me increased the Vata in me, and I expressed that as more Vata, right? But my essence is really Kapha. Like if I'm really like, when I'm just in a restful state, no exterior Just in a normal state, that's what I prefer is Kapha things. But if I'm honest, my Mercurialness gives me a little bit more of balance, right? And there will be habits and things that you can do to increase one or increase the other, right? But first, it's important that you understand yourself. Kapha. Kapha is heavy. It's slow, dull, cool, oily, smooth, slimy, soft, dense, stable, and sticky or cloudy. The difference between Vata and Kapha, again, Kapha illnesses are like tumors or obesity, diabetes, these things that are involved in like processing sugars because it's a comfort food. Vata will feel more fear and anxiety. Pitta will feel more anger, and Kapha will feel more sadness or resentment. Um, so if you realize that energy is different, you have to see what you, because Pitta will even turn fear into anger, right? If Pitta's scared, they'll get angry about it. That they'll transmute everything into those emotions, right? Um, how can you tell? So for example, Vata and Kapha, they both don't like the cold. They both hate the cold because it's uncomfortable for them because they are naturally cold and they don't want an excess of that because it's going to make them unstable. So, but Kapha doesn't like the cold, but they'll tolerate it because it's like it's not painful to them. Vata suffers in the cold, like literally physically they suffer, right? So it's a different kind of energy, right? There are subtle things. I don't know if there's any comments, anything to add to this that maybe I didn't cover, or any questions in general. Okay, so for example, how you spend energy, and this relates a lot to how you spend money, right? So for example, Vata spends energy like crazy and will spend money like crazy. Um, and Kapha will save energy and it will save money, right? And Pitta will spend, but maybe impulsively, or so fire in general can burn through money, but on specific things that it really likes, right? Vata will just not even think about it and just spend their energy and their money because it's this anxious energy, right? These are some characteristics of the body and the mind. For example, Vata can need to have sex often, but the reason why they have sex, maybe it's just to keep them busy, right? It's not so much that they really enjoy sex. It's that it gives them something to do with their hands, with their mouth, with their body. It keeps them busy, and that's what Vata enjoys, busyness. So there are habits that you can use to modify, so you can increase or decrease certain things in your life. For example, if you are very Vata, do not snack. Take your time to eat, because the snacking or this eating while standing, while moving, I'm very guilty of this. I will eat while I'm standing or while moving around, and that increases the Vata energy. Making a hearty meal, take your time to sit down and eat, focusing while you're eating is a very Kapha thing, and it's even a spiritual thing. It can bring the nutrients into your body and process your body differently, because it's not only what you eat, it's the emotions while you're eating that affect your digestion process. It's that fire of digestion that's affected as well, right? That's why, because this digestive fire, Pitta people will have a quicker digestive process, right? So for example, the Oriental cultures say that, well, most cultures nowadays, because it's scientifically proven, that you shouldn't drink cold liquids when you eat, because it will put out the digestive fire. So drinking, if you're going to drink something, if you have to drink something while you eat, let it be a hot thing, a tea. It will help fuel the digestive fire. Heat in general moves molecules and will make molecules dissolve, right? And that's what you want in the digestive process. You want molecules to be undone so your body can take them in and make other things with them, right? Beautiful. Anything else that I'm missing? Okay. So this concept of tamas, sattva, and rajas, this is more spiritual. Um, this is more so about like that connection between mind and spirit. Um, Rajas is more like passionate. So, for example, spicy food will bring out this passion more in you, which is related to Pitta in some way. Sattva can be it's not really with Vata or Kapha. It's just Sattva is clearness. It's spirituality. It's holiness. So there are foods that are more rajasic, that will be more passionate. There are more sattvic, more subtle, and more spiritual. And there are food that are duller and they'll slow you down, right? So people that are very not quite spiritually evolved will be more tamasic, will be very lazy. They've kind of lost that lust for life, right? And this is food like like white like white rice, like white bread, very processed food that's like starchy will be very tamasic and will slow you down, right? If you eat a lot of that, that's gonna kind of bring down even your spiritual evolution, because uh, we do have, there's this phrase in Ayurveda that says, whatever affects your body will sooner or later affect your mind, and will sooner or later affect your spirit, your karma. And it's the other way around. Your spiritual evolution will leak through into your physical and into your mental and your physical, right, habits. They are separate things than the doshas, right? This is more spiritual and mental, and the doshas are more physical and mental. Okay, so why all this? Because there are planets that are said to be sattvic, more spiritual planets, right? Like the sun, moon, Jupiter. In science, they're said to be more holy, right? So there are signs that start to be more passionate, like Aries, Taurus, Gemini, and Libra, and planets that are being more passionate, like Venus and Mercury. It's obvious why Venus is, right? Same thing with tamasic, with dull, kind of more physical planets that will cause you not to see it quite as clearly, like Mars, Saturn, and the nodes, right? Or like Virgo, Scorpio, Capricorn, and Aquarius. Now, this concept can be a little bit complicated. I'm not going to go too much into it, but this is just why these concepts apply. It's more so to Vedic astrology, right? I'm going to put a planetary mantra while we take a brief pause. I'm going to put it in the chat, and for those of you, I'm going to put it in the comments or send it to you, right? What is this pause is going to take up at least a 10-minute break and listen to this mantra. And in these 10 or 15 minutes that we do take a break, see what this energy does to you. This is an exercise we're going to see how the energy of the sun affects us, how the energy of the sun, what it does to us. It's just an observation. So I'm not going to say anything, but these words apparently, like the Sanskrit language and these specific combination of words apparently has an effect over us. And it doesn't matter if you understand what it's saying or not, right? So I'm going to go ahead and send that to you guys and put it in the chat, and we'll see how that happens. I'm going to go ahead and pause it. And as I pause the recording, you guys please take 10 or 15 minutes to observe the effect of this mantra over you. Hi, welcome back. I hope you guys had an interesting time observing how this mantra modified your emotional and energetic state. What we're going to do now, we're going to go in depth into each one of the planets and their energy in our chart and in our life, okay? So the sun, there's a reason why sun sign astrology became so popular. All these sun sign columns, right? That based on what sign the sun was in, and the interactions of the other planets and what was going on in that sign, they made general predictions about your life. Now, it's not quite so accurate because it can vary. There are 30 degrees in the sign, right? And even though the sun has 5 degrees or 10 degrees to each side, for it to be considered a conjunction, depending on what school of thought you abide by. It's not the only thing that's important, right? We're going to talk about what the sun means and why it matters so much. But there are even differences. For example, it's going to be more important or more prevalent, the energy of the sun in a day chart if you were born during the day. How can we tell if we're born in a day chart or not? Well, if we take a random natal chart, just going back to maybe Frank Sinatra's natal chart here. This is the eastern horizon, this is the western horizon, this is everything that's above us, right? So if the sun is here in houses 12, through 7, it's going to be a day chart. If you realize Frank Sinatra is a night chart, or was born during the night, right? I would say, let's see, he was born at 3 a.m. Okay, beautiful. So, yeah, the sun is going to be prevalent in any chart, but more so in a day chart, right? Because obviously, when it's day, the sun is the only thing you can see as far as the other luminaries. Sometimes you can see the moon. So, what is the sun? It's a consciousness in the present moment. It's that energy that colors your life. So, for example, my sun is in Gemini. So, that light, that vitality that's going to color me is going to be very airy, very quick, very mental, just like Gemini is, right? For example, if you have a Virgo sun, it's going to be more controlling, more analytical, critical energy. Um, it really depends. The major themes of your soul's life will be present there, right? So what house is in, because the houses represent the major themes that are happening in your life. Remember, if we remember, the houses are certain segments of the sky, of the area, space around us, that represents certain areas of our life, right? So, for example, my sun is in my 10th house. So that's going to mean that a lot of my soul purpose has to do with being seen, with being recognized. People that have the sun in the 10th house sometimes have very traditional, very typical careers. For example, I studied to be a doctor. It's a very kind of typical, respected career, like a lawyer, sometimes an engineer, although an engineer has other um, relations with other houses, right? So that's going to be incredibly important because it does express a lot of your soul purpose, how that's going to play out. Now, in some schools of thought, the sun is considered a malefic planet. It's definitely not the majority. Why? We talked about malefic planets and how they're considered like subjectively more difficult time. Why would the sun be considered a malefic? It's not because the sun is bad, but because its energy is going to be there whether you like it or not. And most of the time, there's a difficult time making peace with that, right? So, for example, I studied to be a doctor, a medical doctor, and that's not what I do nowadays, right? That's something that it's weird because I felt even pressured to study it, but I enjoyed it. Like it's not something I was obligated into. But it's not something that I have 100% peace with in my life, right? So my life purpose, if I were to interpret, if I was a client and I was interpreting their chart, I would say, um, your sun is in the 10th house, so it's a house of recognition, of achievements, of being recognized, of being seen. So your life purpose will have a lot to do with that, with being a leader or accomplishing things, right? If it was, I don't know, in the 5th house, it's going to have a lot to do with being a mother or um, having children or being just very creative or developing your projects, right? So that's going to vary a lot. It's very important we check out the themes associated with the house the sun is in, and it's very important that we check out what sign it's in because that's the general energy that's going to filter our life. It's going to be expressed in our life, right? Give me a second. Give me 1 second. Much better now. Okay, so your general vitality. If your sun is in, for example, give me a second. So, for example, if your sun is in your first house, which represents your body, that impulse, that energy, your temperament, you're probably going to have a lot more energy than most people, right? But depending if it's in a sign that the sun likes or feels comfortable with, that might go up or down a bit, right? So we're going to see which houses express themselves more in your life and more in your body. But just if you take that into consideration, we have to consider the sign and the house that it's in order to conclude what the sun says about you or what your sun says about your life and your soul purpose, right? Um, so yeah, most people have some issues about being reluctant, accepting their sun as that, right? So, and I experienced that in myself, there was kind of like a secret need or want to be seen, but at the same time, I didn't really like the work and involved. Like I didn't want to put that effort in, and that wasn't something that I needed to be whole. But it feels something that I kind of am pushed into. So whatever your sun is in, it's something that you're gonna. It doesn't matter how hard you try and avoid it; it's gonna be there. It's gonna present. It's part of your karma, your life purpose, right? So, um, general vitality, right? We talked about that ability to assert yourself in leadership, because the sun is a natural leader. It's naturally seen. Um, that's going to be affected by where your sun is in its aspects to other planets. So the planets, when we talk about aspects, they're having kind of an energetic conversation with each other, and it's either going to make the energy involved with them more difficult or easier, and we'll see that later on. But as far as creativity, courage, very important themes for the sun, right? The sun in the fifth house will be an incredibly creative person, unless they have maybe a conjunction with Saturn, which will make that difficult, right? So intense creativity that might be difficult to express, or that might not come out until later in life. Central to personality, yeah, definitely. And yeah, and it's going to be more evident or prevalent in day charts and night charts. We have to see where all the other planets are, right? And its energy is Pitta, so it's a very fiery energy. It's an energy that burns, right? So if a planet is too close to the sun, you can't see it, right? It's opaqued by the sun. So for example, there are certain planets where that's much more affected, right? If Mercury is kind of used to being close to the sun, so it has to be a very, very tight conjunction for Mercury for that communication to be affected or overshadowed by the sun. So people that have maybe a very tight Mercury sun conjunction, maybe will have a lot of difficulty expressing themselves. Maybe they're brilliant, but maybe they have a difficult time organizing those thoughts or expressing those thoughts in some way in an analytical sense, or um, or maybe even in an oral sense. Or for example, the sun opaquing Mars, right? That's a lot of fire, so it might wear you out a lot. It might affect your health depending on how it's placed. So here we go. So how do we detect the types, right? So this is a practical astrology course. So I want you guys to understand how we see this, right? So for example, give me a second. I want to be able to see myself as well, because I only see, okay. So a solar type is someone that has a whole bunch of energy, that sleeps very little. It almost seems like they have this intense energy, give them almost superhuman abilities, and are always seen. Your eyes are always drawn to them, right? They're attractive. There's something that attracts you toward them, but it's not necessarily because they're beautiful people, right? There's something like mystical and magical about them, naive. They can be more born or made through different ways of meditation, of channeling, of working yourself. You can bring out the solar energy in you. And it creates this magnetic attraction, and even is said to radiate heat, right? Some examples of some solar types of Jesus, Jim Morrison, Gandhi. I think Gandhi wasn't born a solar type, but he was made through his work, through his internal work, a solar type, right? Very good. So someone that has the sun in their ascendant, where the sun energy comes out a lot, is Mr. Brad Pitt, right? For example, Bruce Lee has the same sun placement in the first house in Sagittarius, right? But this is a very grandiose, look at me kind of energy that he just naturally has. It's who he is. And his life purpose has a lot to do with him working on himself, with being seen, which is very, very sun-like themes, right? Very good. Any questions about the sun, please? Any? No? Beautiful. Excellent. So, the moon. What does the moon pertain to, right? So the moon pertains to emotional needs and to the subconscious, kind of your automatic mind. So the moon controls the tides, has a very tight significance in conjunction with kind of water. So since it controls the tides, it controls the flow of water. We're mostly water. It's going to modify this water energy in us. So where the moon is very important. Specifically, if you were born at night, it's going to affect you maybe a little bit more than if you were born during the day, but it's going to affect us maybe more, a little bit more if you're a woman, you're a man, because a woman has a lot to do with this kind of estrogen motherly energy, right? But there are a lot of feminine guys out there and a lot of masculine women. So it has to kind of, you have to see and analyze a couple of things in context. There is this analogy of your mind being like an ocean. If there's a storm, it's very choppy, very quick, a lot of waves. If it's calm, it's the ocean at rest. It's very receptive. It's beautiful. It's easy to be in. So the moon is very much like your automatic mind. The way that for example, moon is Scorpio. Scorpio is kind of a aggressive planet, a very intense planet. So moon in Scorpio, especially because like the moon, something happens to the moon with some water signs where it's expressed more, right? Or more evident, more emotional, more of the typical moon and water signs are very strong, right? So for example, if you have a moon in Scorpio, it can have very aggressive or very kind of resentful energy uh, directed towards people, and the automatic mind, the automatic thoughts can be more geared through like aggressive or violent kind of tendencies. So, for example, if you have your moon in Leo, it can be more grandiose or um, I'm the bomb, or this kind of easier sense of confidence in the world, where your moon in Virgo, and it can be very much more so controlling, right? So your moon says a lot about those automatic thoughts, how easy it is for them to be quickened. For example, an airy moon can be a lot of internal life, right? It can sometimes people with a moon in an air sign can seem like they're not really there because they're so in their head, or maybe it can seem like they're not so connected with people emotionally because it's more of a mental connection. Um, so it really depends on where your moon is placed, on how you move, perceive it. Or you have to see, also contemplate where the other planets are, because let's say you have a moon in Earth and you have a whole bunch of planets in water. You're going to have more water qualities than Earth qualities show up, right? But it's also how you are when you're kind of alone, this kind of unique, special essence to you. Um, it's how you nurture emotionally and how you like to be given. So Earth moons can be, moons that are in the Earth elements can be very physical, or require the other person being there, present in their life, right? Um, the the moon has to deal with cycles. So anything that has to do with cycles can be very significant of the moon. For example, the stock market is not only Mercury, it's also the moon, because it's these cycles and it's this constant change. Um, Obviously, it's going to be more present in night charts. It's a lot of a kapha energy, kind of this expansive. Um, some people say that the moon represents your pancreas, right? So it's this expansive, kind of sugary, sweet, comforting energy, and it's more kapha energy in the sense that it kind of retains water. People that are very lunar will retain a little bit more water. Um, or tend to eat sweet things that will increase their body size. Um, but bringing this down to the practical aspect of this, if you're just looking at a person, how do you tell if they're a lunar type? Well, they're not going to have a lot of energy. They can have kind of these quick bursts of like anger because they get upset. Um, because they're so receptive to things around them, they can get kind of grouchy. Um, a lot of the moon energy can be a lot of the kind of the Cancer energy. Give me a second. There's someone else joining. So, okay. So how can you tell if someone is lunar? They're going to have low energy, and everything they do is going to be oriented around conserving that energy. Physically, they're going to be kind of more pale, kind of a whiter shade. But for example, um, since they have such low energy, they say no to most things. Why? Because they don't want to waste the little energy they have in trying new things. They want to kind of stay safe. They want to stay in their comfort zone. Um, so they can be very critical of others' ideas or other things because but that can be a good thing because they don't require the approval of others. As long as they're okay, as long as them and the people around them, their very close friends, are safe, they don't really care about anything else, right? So these are people that really mean it when they say they don't care about what others think about them, right? Because they're solitary, moody people, more kind of introverts. But they're so sensitive to others' emotions that sometimes they can. It's not that they don't want to be around other people; it's that other people's emotions and energy can be overwhelming for them because it's a water receptive energy, right? Um, as far as physically, there can be pale, kind of wear a lot of white or a lot of black, kind of mysterious. Nocturnal people they're most likely nocturnal people, right? What about the lunar type people, right? They will administer their energy, like we said. They will not waste their energy on trying new things most of the time. And they don't have a lot of friends, but the few friends that they do have they're very close to them. They connect very deeply to them. They would do almost anything for them because they love them so much, or they care about their inner circle so much. They take their time to understand new concepts. They're definitely not people you rush. If you don't want to get on their bad side, if you don't want to have a confrontation with them, do not rush these people. Let them take their time to digest the information, right? They don't like to to appear in pictures. They don't like to post a lot of pictures of themselves normally, even though they can be like beautiful. They prefer not to show themselves to the world necessarily, right? Um, And what happens with lunar people? They need to learn their mission in life. Really needs to be on expanding, on letting other people in, on working on personal relationships, and having more contact with people, even though it's difficult for them. Right? Maybe putting this boundary, not like being able to interact with people without and putting the boundary if the energy is too much, but in that moment of intense emotion, being able to control that and move past that. Because it's a very receptive energy, they also need you to learn to put out energy and change the world, and not just be kind of influenced by it. If that makes any sense. Any questions on lunar type people or the moon in general? Okay, beautiful. Now the next planet we're going to cover is Mercury. Mercury, it's at in our chart. And again, if you don't have your chart, you can always send me your birth time, place, birth date, time, and place, and I'll go ahead and get it to you. Mercury is all about the analytical mind. If the moon is about the automatic mind, what your automatic thoughts tend to be, Mercury is how you solve problems. Very Mercurial people need to stay busy solving problems all the time. These are more personalities that have a tendency to get addicted to like being on their cell phone and stuff. Not because um, not because they have addictive personality, because they need to keep their mind busy, their creative analytical mind busy, right? Um, and it's mental energy, but it's creative energy. Um, let's see. It's communication. It's how you communicate and express yourself, but it's not necessarily your voice. Your voice isn't necessarily Mercury. It can be your speech pattern, how you communicate orally, if you articulate well or not. If you're lazy when you speak, for example, I'm very lazy when I speak. I don't like to speak. But once I get started, my Mercurial nature has a hard time stopping. But I would prefer to stay silent than actually speak. Because I have my Mercury in Taurus. Taurus is a very relaxed, slow, lazy sign, you know. But Mercury speaks about how you understand, about your analytical understanding. It's about everything you learn in life. So, for example, school is a very Mercurial thing because you're learning something to apply it. Um, whereas, for example, Jupiter is more spiritual, philosophical understanding, and something that you're born with, not something that you develop, right? Mercury can represent your ability with your hands, very technical um, careers, right? How you acquire new skills. If you're very Mercury, you can probably learn very quickly. And if you use it and apply it, it'll probably stay with you for a while. If you don't, it can be gone pretty quickly as well, you know? Confidence, for example, the third house, which is very Mercurial, says a lot about how your confidence is. People that have a very strong Mercury or very strong will probably not believe in kind of prophecies and mysticism. They make their own way in the world, right? 12, it takes 12 to 14 months to go through the entire zodiac because it follows the sun. But depending on what time of year you start tracking it, it can vary from following the sun directly. The sun takes 12 months to go through around the zodiac. And the Mercury can't get too far away from it because its orbit is so close to it. So as we observe it, because Mercury is so close to the sun, it's not going to go too far away from it, right? Retrograde planets. When a planet is retrograde, it's way more important and more prevalent. So all the themes that accompany Mercury, like electricity, like communication, like how a contract is worded, it can be, all these kind of things will be very important. So everyone's afraid of Mercury retrograde to the point where some people don't leave their house when it's Mercury retrograde. You shouldn't really do that. I mean, you shouldn't stop living your life because a planet is a certain way, but you should be more cautious because, for example, communication will have a bigger toll on your life, will be more prevalent in your life when Mercury is retrograde. So you really have to watch what you say and say it in a very specific manner. Watch the energy and how you say things, much more so in Mercury retrograde. If you're going to sign a contract in Mercury retrograde, I really recommend you read through and you understand exactly what you're signing, because that can be more prevalent, more important. Okay. And it rules the nervous system, not so much the electricity that flows through them, but the actual structure of the nervous system. So if Mercury is weak in your chart, you could be more susceptible to nervous system pathologies or illnesses. When someone is very mercurial, they're not going to be quite, they're very flexible in their way of adapting which I'm actually going to talk right now. They can seem almost flip-floppy and almost spineless, because they will behave one way with a certain group of people and another way with another group of people, right? So Mercurial types, um, since they are so flexible in the way they view things and the way they can operate, it's very quick for people to say, oh, they're spineless or they're flip-floppy. Yeah, but it's their essence, it's who they are. And sometimes we do need people like that in order to understand and to empathize with us, or to at least understand us mentally. How do you understand? How do you see someone that's very mercurial in their essence? And the reason why I'm telling you what the Mercury will signify in your chart, but also how you can observe a very mercurial person, is so you kind of learn to analyze people in your life. Okay, so is he very mercurial? Is he very Saturn? Is he more moon or more lunar, right? Once you understand these kind of people, like, oh, this person seems kind of lunar, kind of beautiful but reserved and silent. Huh, pale. I wonder how their moon is placed. And if you ask them for their natal chart information, very close people to your life, and you observe their moon, you'll see that their moon placement is either very strong or in the first house, or making some very interesting aspects to other planets, right? So it's very important that you ask for people's charts that you know that closely, and you analyze them. And if you do this exercise before, where you reflect on the people in your life, oh, they're very mercurial, oh, they're very Saturn, oh, they're blah, 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 right? This is when you'll develop this ability to, okay, this person is very Martian. I wonder how Mars is placed in their chart. And you ask for their chart. Oh, they're a Scorpio ascendant. Scorpio is ruled by Mars in traditional astrology. Okay, this makes sense. That's why I'm getting this Mars energy from them, this kind of aggressive, intense energy. Okay. Um, Mercurial types have a lot of energy, but it's creative energy. It's mental, creative energy. They're creative problem solvers. They're not so much, they don't have the energy to finish an entire book. If you have the patience to read an entire book, you're probably not Mercurial. Mercurial people will begin a whole bunch of books and then kind of, oh yeah, I understand this, and then put it away because they have such anxious creative energy that they need to move on and do something else, and they constantly need to do different things. I'm a very Mercurial person, right? So I have a lot of books in my shelves that I began to read, and then I'll go back and pick up. But reading a book from start to finish is incredibly difficult for me. But I do read a lot, but I don't read a lot from one entire book, right? Um, and that's fine. That once I understand that about myself, I do have to have some discipline and force myself to finish entire books, which I have in the past. But also make peace with who I am and understand, okay, sometimes it's going to be very simple for me just to, sometimes it's healthy for me just to read a book, get some information from it, absorb it, apply it, and then, fantasize, analyze it in my head, and then move on with something else, because that's how I process energy well. And sometimes forcing myself to read a book, even though it can have an entire book from start to finish, it can have good consequences for me as far as discipline, but negative consequences as far as I'm not accepting, embracing who I am, and I'm not utilizing that to be more successful in life, in using my virtues. Does that make sense? Or did I just kind of talk circles? Yeah. Okay. So they like to make a game out of everything. Mercurial people have fun. They're looking how to have fun with things all the time, right? Um, and because their brain can be so active, they're so good at talking, or they talk a lot, they can be good salesmen and they can lie quite easily, right? I'm not such a good liar. That's a Mercurial quality that I don't have. I mean, I can lie. Obviously, we're all capable of lying, but I'm not the best at it. Like most Mercurial people are really good at lying, or they lie with a lot of ease, right? Um, some Mercurial people, you're so used to them lying that you're like, oh yeah, they're lying, right? But it's more so because you of the context than actually you picking up on their lie. Intelligent, compulsive, um, competitive, manipulative. Yeah, that's definitely something that they can be, because they love finding the loopholes. They love making their own way in the world, but not like forcing it. How they can uh, make things happen and arrange things in order for them to get their way. But it's different than a Martian energy. Martian will be straightforward and force their way on the world. Mercurial energy will run circles and lie and organize things to get their own way in the world. It's a very different kind of energy. And because their brain is so active, because their mind is so active, they can easily become anxious and paranoid. Okay, this excessive mental chat can be very, very difficult to control for them because their brain is so quick. They're entertainers. Their mind doesn't stop. They start a whole bunch of projects and finish few because they need to move on to different things. Right. So these are people that maybe are capable of having two projects and jumping from one to another to keep themselves entertained. But if they have 3, 4, 5 projects, they're probably not going to get far with any of them. Right. Um, they must learn to finish projects and to focus. Right. That's kind of a lot of their life purpose. Like it's accepting their essence, but also not being limited by that. Any questions about Mercurial people, Mercurial types in general? Okay. Um, we all have all the planets somewhere in the sky. So these planets are going to express themselves some way in our life, but some people, it's expressed way more, right? So Mars energy. What does Mars signify in astrology and the natal chart? Assertiveness, beginnings, physical exercise. So like this energy of doing, of changing. How you direct your energy, what you spend your energy on, is going to be largely based on Mars, right? If you output a lot of energy, or if you have the ability to output a lot of energy, because Mars has a lot of physical energy, and that intense amount of physical energy can be translated into violence, um, or in the worst case, violent rape, um, in the best case, is just moving and doing a lot. Uh, or someone that's an athlete, right? So if you look at a chart and Mars is on the ascendant, and trining a whole bunch of different planets, and trining the sun, and maybe in a fire sign, it can be someone that's incredibly violent, or incredibly or a very good athlete. And sometimes it can be both. So maybe some people that are top athletes in the UFC, if they weren't top athletes in the UFC, maybe they would be criminals or murderers, you know? So it's good that we have an outlet for people like sports, like fighting, that actually allows for this Martian energy to be channeled in a very positive way, in a very physical way, that's accepted and embraced. Because we don't really want to put aside any kind of people for society. We want to include all people in our society, but all people are different. So we have to find the best way that they fit into our society. So what does it signify in your life? If you take a very literal definition: violence, fire, war, iron, hot things, right? The color red. So I don't know, maybe if you have Mars in your fourth house, maybe your childhood home was a red brick house, right? Because red is Mars as well. A desire to get away from the center. You realize that its symbol is circle, center, spirit, and then moving away from it, changing. Challenges, competition. It's all things that Mars likes. That Mars is symbolistic of. Sports stadiums, for example. That's a very Martian type of energy. Action, discipline, order. Although discipline is more so Saturn. Uh, Military things are very Saturn and Mars, because you need the discipline to wake up early, but you also need the will, the inner strength to do it, which is more Mars, right? Sexual desire, that's the sexual drive is given by Mars, right? And it takes 684 days to go around the zodiac, and its energy is Pitta. It's this fire energy, right? Yeah. Oh yeah. The cards here are just their representation in tarot. I'm not very big on tarot. I prefer astrology, but there is a correlation between the tarot cards and astrology, right? So I just wanted you guys to know what the correlation was, in case you were interested in that. But it's not something that I do, and it's not what the course is about, right? But some of the symbolism is very receptive to what the Martian energy is. Sometimes Mars uncontrolled can lead to disaster, but sometimes it's just movement and change. How do you practically, analytically observe someone that's very Martian? How do you identify someone as a Mars type? Okay, well, they're going to have very high physical energy, and this is similar. Children, we don't change in our essence from when we're children to adults. Our essence stays the same, right? So a child that's very lunar will be more shy, will be more like not, yeah, they won't like, if you have visitors at your house, they're not going to go talk to them immediately. They're more standoffish, more pale children. A Mercurial child will just start talking and blah, 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 blah about all the things that they've done, right? A Martian child will kick things and move things and push and touch because their energy is physical. Like, it's not very creative to kick a can or to kick a ball but it's physical work, right? So it's not so much mercurial energy, it's physical energy. So a child, ADD is a very mercurial thing because their mind is very activity. But if it's ADHD, if they're physically need to get that energy out, that's Martian energy, right? So most like ADD is just incredibly mercurial people that are not understood in the world, right? And they do need to work on that, but they also need to respect and embrace and love the way they are, right? So Martian people, they're very direct and very practical, excessively practical. They don't care how stuff gets done. They care that it gets done. These are people that will not be able to sleep because they're thinking of things they want to do, stuff they want to get accomplished, right? Or they'll wake up in the morning in a bad mood because they dreamt about doing stuff, and they're upset that they didn't really get that done and they need to get it done now. So it's so focused on doing, on moving, on changing. It's so that can be very explosive and very angry people. Um, and they normally need to sleep the least amount of all the types except the solar, right? And they can be very destructive and very impulsive if this energy is not channeled correctly. Trump is a very Martian type, very, in a more political escape, right? I try to make these pictures, these images, a little bit like representative of what the actual energy is like. They do not shy away from conflict, right? They just want it taken care of now, and they will face it, right? And they can focus on the negative, but they don't get upset about it. They're like, okay, I have all these things that I have to overcome. Let's go ahead and do it. Whereas a lunar will get upset and maybe, unmotivated by the negatives. They're like, oh, I have all this to overcome. That's awesome. I have stuff to do now. Let's go ahead and do it. They definitely hate taking orders. They love being in charge. So how you talk to each specific type will have a lot to do with their motivation. They don't like to take orders, so maybe you have to make them believe it was their idea, or ask them how they would do this, right? Get them excited about doing it. They must make a competition or a game out of stuff. They need to find that way to have fun when they're doing stuff and be diplomatic, because that's kind of their mission in life. They're not naturally diplomatic people, so they need to learn how to compromise, which they hate, and if you want to deal with them, give them interesting challenges that'll keep them busy, and you'll be able to interact with them way better. Okay. Bean, any questions on Mars, on Martian types? No? Okay. Venus. What does Venus signify in your chart? Venus in your chart symbolizes a lot of harmony, relationships, what you enjoy, what you find beautiful. If you're a man, what you find attractive in a woman, or if you're a woman, what you find attractive in general, what you enjoy, right? Art. It's a big significant of art, of this kind of soft creativity. Femininity. It will signify feminine people in your life, but they're the same status as you, not older, not younger. For example, Mars can symbolize males that have the same status as you, like your brothers, your siblings, or your coworker. They're a male, right? Venus is more of females that are young or the same status as you. How you interact with others, what you bring out in others, what you like in others, the people that you tend to gravitate towards because you enjoy being around this kind of energy, right? For example, someone Venus in Aries, so a woman with Venus in Aries might really enjoy very strong, assertive men. Someone with their Venus in Cancer might enjoy more the company of motherly men that make her feel safe and that spend time with her. A man with Venus in the ascendant might be more feminine, more more beautiful physically, right? Or attractive in general. Venus takes anywhere from 10 to 12 months to go around the entire zodiac. And the energy is Vata and Pitta, so it's more air and earth energy, not so much fire. Venus doesn't burn, right? It's something that we look at a lot with fertility. And how do you notify, how do you see someone that's a Venus type? How do you identify them? Well, they're going to have very low energy, so they're just going to flow. They're just going to kind of this hippie, relaxed kind of energy. I love this image for that. I think it's copyrighted, but I don't know. It's just this gorgeous kind of hippie, relaxed, flowy, surfer dude kind of energy. There are people that just because there's just go with the flow, it didn't really care. Like they know they're going to be okay if a certain thing happens in their life, or if it doesn't, they're still going to be alive, right? So they don't really get upset by it. They can be very sensual or sensorial people. They just love sensations and physical touch, and they're really focused on the five senses. Let's see. Venus people tend to say yes to everything, and the reason that Venusian people tend to say yes to everything is because they don't really care what happens. They're just there to flow. Um, they don't like to take decisions, and that's part of their it's part of their life purpose, is learning that stuff in their life has consequences. So very Venusian people tend not to plan, tend not to organize things, tend not to contemplate how their decision is going to affect others. And so that's part of what their discipline, their journey in this life needs to take them into balancing, into taking others into consideration, planning things out, knowing that their decisions will have consequences that will affect the world in general, right? And this will lead to them being more balanced human beings and more functional human beings, right? But in the positive sense, Venusian people, like, the universe will almost conspire in their favor. Have you ever realized that the lazy people, the universe, just stuff just tends to work out for them? They always tend to be okay. It's just because they learn to flow, and Venus is a planet that's very associated with like a divine gift, the divine feminine giving you something, right? Okay. Jupiter, Jupiter. Jupiter speaks a lot about growth, expansion. It's a planet that obviously is very Kapha because it's very um, expansive growth energy. People that have very Jupiter in the ascendant will either be very tall or bulky or fat because they're big. It's this big, expansive, joyous energy. Um, they're teachers, but it's what not so much that people that are Jupiterian or jovial are teachers. It's that the planet itself is how your teachers are going to be. Or let's say, when a planet is retrograde, sometimes it's negative. It's more intense, but sometimes it has negative connotations in your life. So if you have Jupiter retrograde, maybe you'll have difficult relationships with the teachers in your life. Jupiter is wise spiritual wisdom. It's not that analytical wisdom that we talked about with Mercury. It's this intense soul knowing. So people with a prominent Jupiter placement will probably have a lot of work done in previous lives, and they're here to kind of share that with other people, right? Um, it's a light kind of don't take life too seriously kind of energy. It's why it's a jovial and vibe, right? But they do have this kind of sense of right and wrong. What you consider right or wrong, how you interact in society, will have to do a lot with Jupiter, right? Jupiter represents religion or a preacher, this divine order to things, right? Um, and it's holistic wisdom. It takes 12 years to go around the entire zodiac. So it will only conjunct with the sun once a year, sometimes twice, depending on if it's like the beginning, the end of the year. And Kapha, it's very expansive Kapha energy, right? So people are very Jupiterian, like they will expand, and they can either expand in muscle, they can either grow in muscle mass very quickly or grow in fat very quickly. Low energy levels. These are people that have low energy, but not quite as low as Venus or Moon. So they're people that will, if you ask them for the favor of taking you to the airport, they will, but they'll probably show up late because they slept in. So they really do care about others. They're materialistic, loving, helping people. They really do want to help. But they want to help because they want to be accepted by you. They need love in their life in order to validate themselves. And this can be quite difficult because their self-esteem is based on others. So they need love in their life, and when they don't have love in their life, they'll settle for praise. And when they don't have praise in their life, they'll settle for just emotionally blackmailing people to be there or to do things for them, Normally we have two planets that are more prevalent in our life, right? We all have all the planets, but Jupiter people or jovial people will love sweets. They just have a sweet tooth, right? And be very enthusiastic. They'll be very happy and peppy when you're there, but then when you leave, or they'll run out of the steam of this peppiness and just kind of crash, right? Because they're outputting too much energy and they're not naturally that energetic. Emotional blackmail. Yeah, again, when they don't have love and when they don't have praise, they'll settle for attention. They'll settle for pity. And that's very sad to see someone that has so much potential kind of settle and emotionally manipulate others, right? But they do depend on others for approval. So they have kind of this empty void in them that they need to fill with other people's attention and love and praise. And what do they need to do in this lifetime? Raise their self-esteem and not depend so much on others. Learn to be more autonomous, more independent, and to love and to give themselves that love that they desperately need. Any questions on jovial people? Is this clicking? Or are you guys kind of understanding, like categorizing people in your life according to these? Yeah. Excellent. So Saturn types, right? Saturn type people are like very solemn.
Question.
Yes.
Would you be able to send these
The presentation?
the
Yeah.
pictures?
Yeah.
Yeah, the pictures so I can like look over them again.
Of course. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
No problem. Yeah, I will send the slides day by day. This is the first day of the course, and I'll give you the first day of the slides. No problem. If I forget, please send me a message tomorrow, because I probably won't get a chance to send them today.
Okay.
So Saturn in your chart delays but never denies. Where Saturn is, the house that Saturn is in, is the area of your life that will take longer to develop. So let's say you have Saturn in the 5th. I have Saturn in the 5th. Maybe you're a very creative person, but maybe you don't. Maybe you're very slow in creating things, or maybe your creativity doesn't really come out until the second half of your life. So very Saturnian people. Like my face is very Saturnian. You can't really tell because of the beard. It's kind of like this, like the sharp features, and the kind of sharp features around the face. This can be a very Saturnian face, right? Saturn in your chart will delay things, will delay both good and bad compensations. But again, Saturn is what brings you the consequences. It's the bare bones. Saturn is the essential things. So when there's Saturn comes by and circles your sun, or you have your Saturn return, which is famous for being this age when you're around 29 years old. Your Saturn return normally takes 29 and a half years. So, but probably from 28 and a half to 30 and a half, you're living your Saturn return. That year of being 29 is normally not a fun year, unless you've been very disciplined and you really worked hard and you did everything you were supposed to, and you're reaping the rewards of that, right? If not, you're reaping the rewards of everything you haven't done. And even then, even if you did everything that was correct, you're still stepping into a new responsibility in society. Saturn's responsibility and discipline. So that can be very difficult for people to handle as well. So normally if you ask, hey, where were you at in your life when you were 29? Oh yeah, it was fun. It was my 20. And then they think about it, and then they go in debt, and they're like, oh yeah, that was kind of hard. I went through a hard depression. Or so normally age 29 is not fun because of that. But it's where you take decisions that will affect the rest of the next Saturn cycle, right? So it's very important to really settle on what your life mission is in that Saturn return, or at least your mission for the next 30 years, right? And Saturn is very Vata, it's very light, it takes everything away. Saturn is the bare bones, right? Saturn and the sun are involved in how strong your bones are, because Saturn is that pressure that is involved in making minerals in general, right? And your bones are made out of minerals. How do you identify Saturn types if you're observing people? Well, Mercurials and Saturn types will talk a lot, but Saturn people will try and explain everything. So I'm Mercurial, but I also have my Saturn side. They love giving context. They love explaining detailed things. They're people that if you ask their opinion on something, they will talk your ear off. As far as they love asking they love having their opinion asked of, because they'll explain very much in depth, right? Analytical thinking. They have a lot of analytical energy. It's not creative energy. It's not physical energy. It's analytical energy. They have the patience to finish an entire book, and they love to problem solve. They love taking a problem, dissecting it. That's just very Saturnian, right? They Saturn is father time. It's Chronos, so they always arrive on time or early. They don't. It's a big thing for them. Or being late to a meeting with a Saturn type person is like basically giving them the middle finger. They hate people that are late, and because they always know where they're at in life and what they still need to accomplish. So they can be um, very aware of what you did and what they did and their role in this, right? And they are focused on things being just and fair, right? They are like the great equalizer. So they have an analysis of what's fair and what's just in their own way of viewing the world, and they love for that to be applied, right? For fairness to be. That's why they bring consequences. That's why it's the Grim Reaper in some aspects, right? Um, and it's why you cultivate it. That's why it's a world, because it's the last tarot card. It's the one that brings you the consequences. Intellectually motivated, good at explaining. Yeah, they're rigid, but yeah, because they're so intelligent and because they spend a lot of time analyzing things, they kind of have strong conclusions in general, right? So because they have made conclusions on how things work, it's very hard to get them to move outside of that perspective, right? So unless you really present a very strong scientifically backed arguments, they're probably not going to budge on their opinion of something, right? And they have an excessive sense of responsibility to have everything planned out. If you have a Saturn type friend, you're like, hey, next week let's go play hooky and just go to the beach. And they'll check their schedule. I can't do next week, but I can do 5 months from now. How's that okay? But no, let's be spontaneous. I can be spontaneous 5 months from now. Does that work for me? So they don't like moving your schedule around, right? It stresses them out. I I noticed that a lot of people with autism have very strong Saturn placements, or are in Saturn rule signs like Capricorn, right, or Aquarius. And they need to learn to be spontaneous, to flow, to take action, because analysis paralysis, like paralysis because of overanalysis, is very typical of them. They will analyze the situation until they're completely sure of it, and that means sometimes they won't take action on it. And that can be very stressful for the people around them. Like, dude, just make an effing decision. No, but I need to take all the facts into consideration. you know? Okay. We're going to talk about the north and south nodes of the moon. That's the last thing we're going to cover today. What are they? So we have an ecliptic plane, which is basically the plane that we circle around the sun, right? So the cycle that we have, obviously it's slanted, but if we were to make it straight and see that, that's our ecliptic plane, right? And the moon, since it circles around us, it also has an ecliptic plane. It's the moon's ecliptical, right? So the points where the plane that the moon circles around is, yes, I think circles around in, intersects with our plane, with the circle that we circle around the sun in, those are called the north and south nodes of the moon. And the ancient Vedic astrologers noticed that this has an intense effect on your life, right? So Rahu is the head, and there's a very beautiful analogy for that, where all the Vedic gods and goddesses, they wanted the elixir of immortal life. And I think it was the head god. I forget which one of the three of them. I think Brahma said, okay, so we need to work together, the demons, or the deities and the gods, and together, the light and dark, we need to. That's the only way that we can make the elixir of life. So he got the demons, he got the gods, and they worked together to make the elixir of life. And it was made, right? And then He didn't want the demons to be immortal because even the gods and the demons have this incarnation process, right? So he didn't want them to be stuck in that incarnation, and he didn't want them to always be around. So he didn't want to give them the elixir for life. So when the gods were lining up to, and the gods and demons were lining up to receive the immortal elixir of life, he disguised himself as a beautiful woman, because in Vedic astrology, kind of the demons are kind of these big biker, aggressive dudes, right? Uh, he turned himself into the most beautiful woman in the world and danced and distracted them, and that gave the gods this opportunity to um, to start drinking the elixir of life. But one of the demons was very intelligent, and he said, "Well, I'm going to trick this guy." And he put on a disguise, and he joined the line. And the sun and the moon were like, I think Brahma, I mean, this guy is a demon. He's going to get it." And so when it was in his hands, and when he was about to take a sip, Brahma chopped off his head. But one drop of the elixir was able to touch his head. So since it didn't go down the digestive tract, and he cut off his head before it could go down, he's destined to live eternally as a severed head and body. And that's symbolic of the sun and the moon. Why? Because they're eclipse points. So when the sun and the moon correlate directly with those points in the sky, an eclipse forms. So Rahu is the head of the dragon that swallows the sun, and then Ketu is the body where the sun comes out of, right? So it's very symbolic of the light and the dark, of where we come from and where we're going, of many things. So when we check out this analogy of also embracing the dark in ourselves, what we don't like about ourselves, in order to be more whole individuals. So this analogy is very, very symbolic. And what do the north and south nodes of the moon symbolize in your life, right? Well, they symbolize the north node is your blind spot, it's where you're focused on, right? You want this so much. So let's say your north node is based on is your north node is on in the 11th house, right? So the 11th house of um, easy money, of entrepreneurship, of large groups, and you want, to be like this marketing internet superstar, uh, and just have an easy passive income, right? And working once, and that's your focus in life, right? That's what you want. But also, since you're so focused on it, there's so many things you don't see about it. There's so many things you need to change in order to achieve that. So yes, you're going to get that eventually, but it's a blind spot. You're so obsessed with that that there's many things you can't see about yourself and about what you need to do to obtain that. So what's the antidote? Your south node. And south node can be very intense insecurities. People that have the south node on the ascendant can have a radically difficult, can be very, very insecure. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. So since the south node is it's the aversion, what you don't want. It's either what you don't want, or in your soul purpose, because your soul has lived a lot of that. It had that experience. It wants to move on to more experiences of different things. So it can be an aversion of like, oh, I don't want to read the book because I know I just, whatever. I assume that I know everything about it. Or it can be an aversion like, I have an intense fear of this. I don't want to be around that, right? So it can be expressed in either way. But wherever your north and south node of the moon are in your chart, they're going to be intense, radical changes. So if you have your north node in the ascendant, for example, Charlie Sheen has his north node in the first house in the ascendant. So that's a lot of who he is. And you realize you can't predict what he's going to do. It's unpredictable. It's a roller coaster. He can be up and down. He can be very confident and then very erratic. So unpredictable things are very Rahu and Ketu, are very north and south node of the moon. But and if you realize Charlie Sheen can't really see who he is clearly. He's got this blind spot on who he is, and it can be this intense confidence that's not really founded on something. That's very north node. So really, with this generation, that's very Rahubian or north node in the 11th house, that everyone's kind of an easy lifestyle. It's very important that we analyze things. Is that really what we want? Why do we want this? because sometimes we can't all have the exact same lifestyle, um, unless we invent robots to take care of everything for us, and then the people that control the robots are going to control life in general. Well, so we're going to end it here and start looking at modalities next time. uh, Modalities are going to be more pertaining to the signs. So next time we're going to see what the signs are, what cardinal, fixed, and mutable signs are, and the houses, and how they affect us in our life. But any questions about what we've seen today? No? Beautiful. Your opinion? Everything good? Thumbs up, thumbs down? Beautiful. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, and we'll see each other next time.